Hi, my name is Tara Kachaturoff, and I'm the host of Michigan Entrepreneur, where we feature businesses from startup to stellar. Today, I have as my special guest Franki Bagdade, who is the owner of FAAB Consulting and Franki Bagdade Therapy. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you again. It's been many years actually since we had our last interview. So it's
It
great
was.
to catch up on what's going on with you and your business and what new things you have to talk about today. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I am Frankie Bagdad, and I am so lucky to be running two businesses, FAAB Consulting and Frankie Bagdad Therapy. So I started out my career in education and special education. And am able to consult with schools, with camps, with other educational organizations, mental health clinics on neurodiversity and disability inclusion. And I also run a small solo practice as a clinical social worker specializing in ADHD, autism, anxiety, and in supporting parents through, the hardest job we ever have, that of parenting.
And in addition to all of that, you've actually written a book, which is what we talked about actually several years ago. And
Yeah.
what's the title of that book? I love the title.
So my other baby here, I love my kids, but I don't always like them. Is my parenting book, my survival guide for parents raising those kids, preschool through early adolescence.
And what was the precipitating factor that created that opportunity for you to write this book? What led you to it?
In 2019, when I was launching FAB Consulting and really starting my entrepreneurship journey, I began to blog. And blogging was such a wonderful gift for me as a student with ADHD myself, who didn't always get such positive feedback on my writing because, spelling and grammar and punctuation sort of eluded me. But I knew I had a voice and I had something to say. So this casual writing and blogging really led me to realize I could be a writer. And I looked at my husband one day and I was like, you know what? I think I have more to say. I think I need to write something in a different format. And that's really organically where the book came from. I realized that my experience working at overnight camps and in schools and in youth organizations with children was something I was bringing organically into my own parenting, and that it was clicking. And I wanted to do anything I could to make the parenting journey easier for other parents.
Yeah, and today it's much more complex than it ever used to be, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not it's
Yes.
not just about making breakfast and getting people ready for school. It's like
Right.
culturally, societally, the global situation. I mean, it's a lot. I
Yeah.
don't even know how parents survive.
I don't
It's
know either.
it, yeah. Very, very tough job. So, yeah, so the title of the book, I love my kids, but I don't always like them. And so does the book helps you like your kids more, right? Because it gives you the tip
That
on
is, that is the goal. The goal is it's really, twofold. It's like, yes, we need those moments where we're like, oh yeah, I like this kid. Like I'm enjoying spending time with them, all of those good things.
Yeah.
And to validate that you're gonna have moments when you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah. All right. Well, today, thanks for that background information. Today, we're going to be focusing more on ADHD. And before we jump right into that topic, can you give us a kind of a foundational definition so that everybody's on the same page before we dive into the questions I have for you today?
Sure can. So, ADHD is a neurological brain based difference or disability, depending on how you look at it. And it affects not only young kids and older kids and teens, but adults. At some point in the history of understanding this disability, we thought it was something that people grew out of as a child, but we now know more and more that there are even some adults who start to be diagnosed later in life as an adult. And it impairs what we call executive functioning. So that could be time management, organization, long term planning, emotional regulation, breaking down larger long-term goals, and even motivation. So as you can, understand just from listening to my description, it's very all encompassing, and it can really make a difference in how we approach our day to day, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, or a student.
And when we talk about executive function, that's referring to like the prefrontal cortex, right? And this is really
Yeah,
the area that we use for directing pretty much everything we do in our life, correct?
absolutely. Yes.
It's the command center. That's why you call it the executive center.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about give us a general sense about ADHD and it being across the lifespan. I know you mentioned a lot of people, they look at it, they see it in the children, but can you
Mhm.
talk about it in the broader context?
Absolutely. So ADHD is still sometimes misunderstood and thought of as those children that you might see as hyperactive, the ones who won't sit still or even look like they're misbehaving in a classroom setting. And so we're more likely to miss the quiet, inattentive type of ADHD personalities who are not unfocused. They're able to focus. That's sort of the misunderstanding, but maybe they're focusing on the wrong things. So a teacher is delivering a lesson and they see children playing outside and that's what they're focused on, or there's somebody tapping their pencil behind them and that is drawing their attention. When you're talking about an adult, it's really kind of parallel. So you're in a staff meeting and what's going on might be very relevant and interesting, but there's someone behind you that is crinkling up a piece of paper and that's drawing your attention in. Or maybe it's internal. Internally, you have that hyperactivity and your thoughts are racing about your to-do list that day. So it really can be similar throughout the age span, but just in different settings depending on what your everyday looks like.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting because I remember some of those things here and there when I was a kid, but I think I must have grown out of it because, like, I don't hear anything and nothing bothers me anymore. Like, I don't know. But
Yeah,
one
yeah.
thing I have noticed is I've got a lot of colleagues, all age ranges. So let's just say probably the 40 to 60 age range. And
Mhm.
I can tell you in the past couple of years, so many of my colleagues have said to me that they have had a diagnosis of ADHD
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they are adults. Can you speak a little to that? Because before, like you said, we kind of think it's all like just children, right?
Right.
And maybe something they grow out of or they don't. But I'm
Mhm.
hearing a lot more about it in the adult world. What do you think
Mm.
that's attributed to, or what's going on?
So there's a couple reasons why a diagnosis may not happen until adulthood. Number
Mhm.
one, we just know more about ADHD now. We understand it. There are more professionals out there who can skillfully diagnose. So sometimes it's just the opportunity isn't there. It may be someone who did struggle as a child, as a teen, academically in school. However, we also know that many of those with ADHD are very bright and have some very exceptional strengths. So they're able to sort of compensate for those deficits and they get by. And then as they're older and they're just more aware of themselves, they get to this point where they're like, you know what? I'm burnt out from getting by. I don't want to struggle. It's time to see what's going on. It's time to get support. I think maybe my particular struggles remind me of someone else I heard of. So some of it is just awareness and accessibility to that diagnosis, to the information that we might not have had, a couple decades ago. Also, there are some people with ADHD that are very academically talented. School is a great setting for them. They love to learn. And like I said, those unique, exceptional strengths help them to compensate for the areas that are challenging. So they may be those kind of students that while they're tuned out from the lesson for a few minutes, they can make up for it because they just have so much intrinsic knowledge. They're able to sort of do the reading and catch up on their own. So we don't notice it when they're students. Also, something I see very, very often in my practice is I have an adult whose child is diagnosed with ADHD and they think to themselves, huh, my child is so much like me. I wonder if I have it as well. that happens so often with other diagnoses as well, but especially with ADHD. And we do know now through research that it can be incredibly hereditary.
I see. Okay. There's two things that kind of that brings up, and I hope I remember them both now. But the first one is um, I have a concern because I think people are always looking for labels for themselves. They
Mm-hmm.
try to self-diagnose ADHD. From what I understand, however,
Mm-hmm.
the tests for it are quite complex to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that they really do have it. And I get concerned when they're trying to self-diagnose. Shouldn't it be the better approach to go see the appropriate professional to get a diagnosis instead of saying that you are something that you might not be, or it could be
Mm-hmm.
something else? What are your thoughts on that? Because there's a lot of that going on, and I think they
Yes.
really need to see the right people first.
Yes, absolutely. So I think similar to you, when I started to see this self-diagnosis trend, which we see in ADHD, we see it sometimes in autism. I sort of had a moment where I was like,
Yeah,
uh-oh, like there's a reason why there's people out there who've spent years upon years researching, studying, and they have the credentials, and let's utilize them. However, I took a step back and I started to ask clients of mine why that self-diagnosis was happening, like what they were looking for, why the diagnosis was important to them. And I found that was a really useful conversation. So the answer to what you're saying is yes, no, maybe, because it really depends why someone is looking for that answer. Sometimes it just feels validating. Oh,
I
I
see.
struggle. I'm an adult and I still can't get somewhere on time, even though I want to, and I'm trying and there's other people like me. Okay, great. I'm not broken. Maybe I have ADHD, maybe I don't. However, it sounds like some of these ADHD strategies may work for me. So I'm going to start, reading about ADHD time management strategies. That to me doesn't bother me. It sounds like just a direction
I
and
see.
how to get
Okay.
some help, right? Now, if if you're interested in working with a psychiatrist and getting maybe working with some medications and some therapies, then we really
Yeah.
want to make sure that we're getting that diagnosis, right.
Right. Right.
And there are things that can look like ADHD that aren't. So it is complicated to diagnose because there's no blood test. It's not like a quick,
Right.
easy diagnosis. It can sometimes be the process of elimination, getting to know a client well, and ruling out other things. So it's kind of a yes and situation. Um, I work with a lot of adults who are coming to terms with the fact that they're struggling in their professional lives and they may really benefit from some accommodations. Well, then you really do want some good documentation, a
Right.
really accurate diagnosis, and then it's worth, I think, taking that time to find someone who can do a thorough evaluation and see what you're working with.
And you do those kinds of evaluations. Do you just do children in your practice, or do you also work with adults?
I actually work with clients throughout the age span. I
Okay.
actually have been working more with adults lately, in that there's a higher need right now, I think, for
Right.
newly diagnosed adults. And the way that social work works in Michigan, it's a little different from state to state. I'm able to diagnose ADHD through some questionnaires that we are norm referenced. They've been highly researched, and through getting to know a client, I sometimes will also send them to a colleague of mine who is a psychologist, and we'll approach it differently, starting with things like IQ testing and
Mhm.
maybe even achievement testing if we're talking about a student. If I want to rule out other things like learning disabilities and really zone in to make sure that I'm not missing anything else.
Right. And once they have that, you can even refer them to get medical help, correct? I mean, they can get prescriptions and other things to help support
Yep.
and through the, yeah.
Yeah,
But you have to go through
absolutely.
formal process to
Mhm.
be absolutely diagnosed as such.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And also psychiatrists will sometimes take a suspected diagnosis and do their own testing to make sure, it's the right fit because they want to be on the right path and prescribing. And, the American Academy of Pediatrics, for example, they just put out a statement. I think we're talking about a year ago. And they say once you're over 6, the greatest chance of success living with ADHD is a combination. Behavioral therapies, working with a social worker like myself, and medication review and working with a prescribing professional. It's that balance. And while
Yeah.
we don't have a similar statement for adults because it's really emerging, that recognizing this as a more common adult diagnosis,
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing as the trend as well.
Yeah. And I do know, from at least speaking with different colleagues, is once they know and they have a diagnosis,
Mhm,
it does provide a lot of relief. It does
mhm.
answer questions for them, and that's why it is so important that they see their doctors. So
Yes,
they
yes,
just
yes,
then they can move
absolutely. We don't
on
need
and be more productive.
Yeah, we don't need to struggle in silence, right?
Right.
There's
Exactly.
there's things we know that help.
Yeah. So, one thing I've noticed because I actually work in the whole entrepreneurial world, that's where all my colleagues are. Why do so many people with ADHD actually gravitate towards entrepreneurship rather than working, let's just say, at a job?
So it is a very interesting phenomenon, and I see it as well. And I think there's some main reasons why that happens. People with ADHD tend to be extremely creative and out of the box thinkers. So they can have that sort of big picture, 5-year plan. This is my product, this is my mission. And that lends itself really well to being an entrepreneur. People with ADHD also struggle sometimes with motivation. And it's not that they don't want to succeed and do well and be helpful and productive. It's that it's even more important, I think, to find meaning in your day to day. So when you're an entrepreneur like myself, I get to structure my life and my business around my passion, which for me is, neurodiversity and disability inclusion and, demystifying disabilities for my clients. And so every day, even if I'm doing paperwork I'm not enjoying, but it's a means to an end, it's still helping me to, fulfill that mission. Another part of ADHD, which I work with a lot of adults who are working on this sort of acceptance process, is we have variable energy levels. We may be more sensitive and burn out more easily. So, when you wake up in the morning, it's one of those days where it is really extra hard to focus and extra hard to, be productive. Being able to modify your schedule on your own, because you work for yourself is a gift. Now, of course, even as an entrepreneur, I have clients and people counting on me, and I have to balance that. But in my downtime, so to speak, I am able to be more accepting of when and how I'll be productive. So instead of saying, I need to do, write 50 pages every day, I prefer to give myself like a long-term goal. Like this week, I want to get this much done. And that way I'm allowed to tweak things depending on how I'm feeling, energy, motivation, focus wise. Because I
Yeah.
will have days where I can do a week's worth of work in a day. So there's that balance, right? And there's so many funny memes about it because it's so true. Like you might have a day where you sit at the computer all day, but feel like nothing gets done. But thankfully, in a couple days, I will have a day where I get more done than the average person fourfold. So I'm able to balance that, I know, as myself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some other careers that are helpful for ADHD folks where they can really find success?
Yeah. So what I see like as my anecdotal research, working
Mhm.
with those with ADHD
Yeah.
for the last few decades, first responders,
Oh,
definitely a big
yeah.
ADHD representation there. Firefighters, public safety, those who work in ICUs and ER and hospital environments, because we do
Interesting.
thrive over those fast-paced environments.
Oh,
I know myself. I worked in overnight camp for 5 summers, and you might not think of that as fast-paced, but
but
I
there's
had
kids everywhere.
emergencies. Right. I mean, I was always on call, right? The kids don't go home. So I
Right.
had emergencies at 2 a.m. and they were complicated. And I had to be up and like really thinking, well, that I can do. That's a special, I think, ADHD skill of mine. So yes, those fast-paced jobs, we definitely see ADHD brains working in. Therapists. I actually have a program that I started to support therapists with ADHD
Oh,
because it
wow.
is so common. We
Really?
love helping professions, right? Because
Oh,
we
interesting.
want to be
Yeah.
motivated. We want to be passionate. We want to know that what we're
Love
doing makes a difference. Well, there we go. So,
that.
therapists. And another one I see is teachers as well, because again, making a difference. And I think there's a group of us who liked learning but found school difficult and really want to help others not have that experience. I know that
Yeah.
was something that drew me into education is I wanted to make it a better experience for, kids like me at school.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's interesting. I like the fact that you have a group just for therapists. That's fascinating.
Yeah,
Lots of
yeah.
different niches there and,
Mhm.
all that y way to share the knowledge, and they really understand it because they're therapists themselves, so that's also
Exactly.
helpful, but yeah,
Yep.
and it's a great coming together so they you don't have to do this alone.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, we'll take a little bit of a turn and talk about just I want to talk about some things because people are always like, well, there's these strategies, there's these tips and things that you can do. Why don't, for example, mainstream time management and organization tips not work for somebody with ADHD?
So, it just really depends on how you're looking at things, right? So what I would find personally is if I read a blog by like a professional organizer, now I think I know how to sort of sift through it and find pieces that make sense to me. But because it was written by someone who was born, type A for lack of a better term, my brain just didn't process it. It didn't work for me. It also had that underlying assumption that there were some innate organizational skills. So when you look at people with all kinds of disabilities, what we need to understand is some of those things that humans just sort of absorb through watching and osmosis, we need to be directly taught. So there are people who watch their parents organize, watch their teachers organize, and they pick it up. They don't really need to be sitting down in the classroom and learning how to organize their schoolwork. There's plenty of them. I've had many students like that. And then there's people more like me who really need to understand and have it broken down and have it taught. So even the way like I would, for example, write a blog about organization for those that are neurodivergent would break it down in a different way, I think, than someone who isn't. And I'm not assuming that any of those organizational skills are already in place. Um, the other thing that I really think is important in these strategies that really fit the ADHD population is knowing that, you meet someone with ADHD, you met someone with ADHD. We're still a population that with lots of differences and lots of different skills, and honing in on what's already going well and what our particular strengths and interests are is really important. We can build on that to work on the areas of deficit.
Yeah, and I actually work with a lot of people in a working environment who have
Mhm,
ADHD because I
mhm.
use a tool called FocusMate, and
Mm,
FocusMate is a fantastic app
mhm,
online where I work with people from all over the world at every time of day or night, um,
mhm.
24/7, and I've met literally hundreds. I've done thousands and thousands of sessions on there,
Oh,
and it
cool.
helps you focus. And most everybody I meet has ADHD. It was built for folks with attention issues, and it's just a fantastic. They're basically Pomodoro sessions that run 25,
Yes.
50, or 75 minutes. And I'll tell you,
Mhm,
that has just been a great thing. And we just work together. And I think
mhm.
also just having that camaraderie with somebody and being on camera with somebody else is
Yeah,
just, to me, that's part of making it all work. I think
yeah.
people, when they feel they have ADHD, they feel isolated and they feel
Mhm.
like they have to be maybe not work with other people or don't feel comfortable. And on
Yeah,
this thing, we all work together. And I like that. I do
yeah.
like,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
you
I
have
can
to find
imagine.
your tribe, you have to find people that understand it.
Right.
And I think something like that just brings people together instead of making people feel like, you're different. Because we all have, this is a spectrum kind of situation, right? I mean, it's a spectrum.
Absolutely.
We all
Yes.
have it to some degree. There's
Oh,
probably nobody, right, that is free of
oh,
this.
absolutely. Absolutely. And when, you'll see a lot of people writing about like, are there more people ADHD or is it our modern world? So again, my answer is yes. There are more people now with ADHD because we understand it and we're
Right,
catching it.
right.
And yes, some of the expectations on us in this modern world do divide our attention in ways that are unsustainable, that nobody
Right,
could
I mean,
keep up with.
nobody could deal with it. It's,
Yes.
like, beyond even the capacity. Social
E-
media has made it that way. No, I don't care who
Absolutely.
you are,
Right.
it is causing attention issues across the
Absolutely.
board.
And a good, I feel like 15, maybe even longer years ago, Edward Hollowell, who's one of the biggest experts on ADHD, wrote a book called Crazy Busy. And he is not trying to debunk ADHD. He very much believes it's there and needs to be respected as such. But what he is saying is when you ask people how they are, what's the answer? Oh, so busy, crazy busy. Well, that
Right.
crazy busy mentality can also look like ADHD, right?
Mhm.
Like when you have
Yeah,
too much to do, something is going to be forgotten. You are going to be late for something because it's too much to do.
right. And all
Mhm.
the differentiation of our attention all day long. I mean, people don't
Yes.
realize, I mean, what the pressure on people today versus even 5 years ago, it is
Yeah.
just, like, amped up and it's just higher and I mean, unless you turn your phone off and stay off
Right.
of social and don't talk to anybody, it's it's hard to avoid this. Everybody is just their brains you just short circuit. I'm exhausted sometimes.
Exactly.
I cannot
Yeah.
look at this stuff because it exhausts me.
Exactly. And you're
Yeah.
explaining it like exactly right because, you know, in careers 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have to make an effort the same way to shut off. You left the office and you left the office, right?
Exactly.
There, when I started teaching in 2001, like, we had email, but it wasn't expected to like, I didn't even have access to it in my home. It was, like, only on the school computer, okay? So, that was it, right? When I was off, I was off. I might be grading papers or whatnot, but very rarely was someone gonna call or email me. It was all gonna be done sort of on my own schedule. Now, it takes a lot of, you know, diligence to put that phone away and get off of social media, to stop checking work emails, like all of those things. It's a totally different animal than it used to be.
It is, and it doesn't feel like it's gonna calm down anytime soon, which is, like, concerning to me because it's hard for me to keep up with it all. It's exhausting
Right,
and,
right. No,
uh,
you're right. It's not,
just
yeah, it's not going to
not
get
sustainable.
better. So then it puts pressure on us and to really figure out how to set boundaries that are
Mhm.
realistic and sustainable and that we can, follow through on. So that's tough, but more important, I think, than ever.
Absolutely. Wow, we could do a whole 'nother program just on that alone, which maybe
Oh,
we
yes.
should. Maybe we should. No,
Yeah,
I'm serious. Maybe we should do
yeah,
another
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
we're running out of time and I only have, like I have a bunch more questions, but I'm gonna have to cut a little short on these. If you could just comment real quickly on, maybe a couple best practices for helping ADHD symptoms before we wrap?
Yeah,
1 or
absolutely.
2.
So I think honing in on what your unique strengths are, they are there. And then what careers would really applaud and celebrate those strengths is so important. So often I have clients come to me who are struggling professionally, and often it's just not the right job environment. It may be the right field, but not the right boss, not the right structure, which is again why some people end up in entrepreneurship. So, really understanding the best fit career for you, I think, is super important. And I would say the second one is just like you explained, finding your support system, finding your tribe, other people who get it. And there are niche groups out there, just like the one I'm running, that's just for therapists with ADHD. Like Focus Mate, you were explaining, there's some great apps out there to find groups virtually if you can't find them locally. But finding people who you can vent to and exchange ideas with is really just so paramount to success.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Frankie. It was a great
Absolutely.
discussion. We'll have to do this again. There's so much more I'd love to explore
Yeah,
in this area
I
because
love
I really
that.
do enjoy it. And I know it's so beneficial for me, for others who deal with this. And I love to get the word out more about it. So we will definitely connect on that. But I'd just like to ask you one final question, if you, real quick, is if you could give one piece of, if like one piece of advice. I know you gave some great advice, but one piece of advice for anybody who thinks they may have ADHD, what would that be?
Reach out. So start with a professional in your life that you already have a relationship with and you trust, like your MD, your general practitioner. They can be a great resource to help you find the right professional. If you have a therapist in your life that you know, they can help connect you with someone. Find a professional. And if you don't connect with that professional on the first session or the third session, keep looking. Find somebody that you feel really feel safe and heard with, and reach out for help. There's so many great resources out there, and you don't need to struggle alone.
Thank you so much, Frankie, for being a guest and sharing all this
Thank
amazing information with
you.
us today. If you'd like more information about our program, please visit us at www.michiganentrepreneurtv.com. Please join me again in the future when I interview another enterprising entrepreneur. Until then, wishing you the best of business.